Hey everyone, happy 2021. Holy cow, I can't believe it. This year feels like it was kind of torturous at sometimes, like it would never end, and like that feeling of what is next and can it get any worse? And then, oh, lo and behold, it did. I think for so many of us, we can identify with that, right? And then in a lot of ways, there were so many moments where I felt really grateful, very blessed, so lucky to live the life that I do and to be able to continue to do the work that I do, like the podcast, for example. And so I just want to take a moment to thank you that tune in regularly to listen. And please know that if you ever have feedback to share, I find that immensely helpful. Also, leaving a review on iTunes or Spotify and rating, that just helps people become aware of the podcast so that more people can share it out. If you find it helpful, then my guess is that other people would find it helpful. So what I've decided to do for the new year, a couple of things coming up. Number one, I have made my own little gift cards. So if anyone out there is interested in working with me on a more personal one-on-one level, I do Reiki. I'm a Reiki healer, certified Reiki healer, and I do health coaching, certified health coaching through the Institute of Integrative Nutrition. And I also teach yoga. So all of those things can be done one-on-one in an intimate setting. And so if you or anyone you know in your life could benefit from that, reach out to me, utilize one of my new little gift cards. And you can reach out to me on many different ways, but the easiest way to get in touch with me is via email, tessa@tessatovar.com. That's TESSATOV as in Victor AR. All of that info is on my website, which you all should be able to find fairly easy, tessatovar.com. So moving into the topic at hand, today's podcast guest is Tim Westfeldt, who I'm so excited about for a lot of different reasons, but I'll share with you my personal experience with Tim first. And as someone who grew up in therapy, I'm not kidding. I mean, I've been in therapy since I was about 5. So I started early. I've had a lot of experience with a lot of different therapists. The minute I sat down in Tim's office, he introduced himself. He told me the style of work he did, and he would not describe it as therapy. He would not describe himself as a counselor. In fact, as you listen to the episode, he will tell you the kind of work he does and how he would see himself. But for me, it was therapeutic in that he asked me one single question. And I just remember this flood of tears erupting from somewhere deep within me that was latent. I mean, I didn't even know it was there. And because I've had so many years of therapy, I am so practiced at, I'm really good at not showing my emotion and figuring out what the other person wants to hear and see from me, obviously not to my benefit, right? Like the point of therapy is to get to the emotion, to get to the root cause, right? And to look at that and let it go, or to learn a lesson in some way. But with Tim, he cut through all of my defenses immediately. And I don't even think he was trying. He just asked me a simple question, but there was something about his presence and his manner and his approach that took me completely by surprise. And I was able to let down my guard and be vulnerable. And this flood of emotion came out of me. Part sadness, part grief, part wonder, part kind of like this awe. I don't always think that crying has to be this thing that is a bad thing, right? I think crying is such a cathartic and important experience, and part of our human existence. So, so to describe Tim, I'm just going to let Tim describe himself. It's way better coming from him. But I think you'll find as you listen to this episode that you will learn something new, many new things. There's so much good material in here about, the human existence, your experience in the world, what emotions are, what feelings are. They're actually different things, which kind of surprised me. It took me a moment to wrap my head around, but Tim and I talk about that, and I'm curious to see how you hear that conversation and how it resonates with you. He talks about 12 fundamental human needs. What are they, and how we can identify them in our lives? He talks about the 4 primary emotions and how we mix them together and create all of these whole different plethora of emotions. In fact, he shared a really cool graph with me that I'll put in a link to in the show notes that can help you really visualize emotions, what those 4 primary emotions are, and how we kind of mix them together to create this whole landscape of emotional experiences from those 4 primaries. So one thing I want to do before I let us go into Tim is just share a few quotes from him. He didn't say these in the interview. This is actually an excerpt from a different interview he's done with a woman named Rebecca Moen. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm sorry, Rebecca, but your words are just, the way that you've captured Tim is worth sharing. So this is a quote from Tim. My work is about helping people learn more about themselves. The only goal I have is for people to use me as a mirror to learn things they didn't know. And I think this is absolutely true and apparent when you listen to Tim talk, or if you have a one-on-one experience with him, you'll feel that right away. The second quote is, and then we'll get on to our show. I personally think if all you want me to do is sit and listen like a traditional therapist, that's asking me to commit malpractice. How can you learn about yourself if I'm just nodding my head and listening to you? You get some benefit from that, from having someone to connect with, but it's an insufficient benefit if you don't learn what parts of you are blocking connections, for instance. So that's Tim's approach to this heart-centered, somatic-based, I mean, therapy is the word that I keep going to, and Tim will use much more eloquent words. But without further ado, please enjoy this show. Please let me know if you enjoyed it and what you'd like to hear more of in future shows. Thank you so much for tuning in. I have a very special guest joining me today, Tim Westfeldt, who I have had the pleasure of working with, and I'm very excited to share with you the work that he does. And today we'll be focusing on that piece of work called Emotional Hygiene, which to me was really new topic to learn about through Tim. And I'm not sure, the history of the topic and where it comes from, which is something that I'm hoping, Tim, you'll touch on with us. And but what I think I'd like to start out by doing is having you introduce yourself and tell us who you are and the kind of work that you do. That's a lot. That might take the whole hour. But anyways, I'll let you start.
Okay, thank you. It's nice to be here. Um, yeah, I guess the about me that's important started when I started working with people in my life back about 30 years ago. Uh, I became a student and then a teacher in an old, dying Asian form of study that was about mental, physical, and spiritual self-development work that um, Americans, when they take a look at it, it came from China, but when Americans take a look at it, they kind of reduce it to a martial art pretty often. It's much more than that. There is certainly self-defense training as part of it, but it's mental, physical, and spiritual self-development work. And once I became teacher in training. I was learning how to teach from an old Asian perspective, which is different than a Western perspective. In a Western perspective, you learn how to scratch that. In a Western perspective, you typically have to get a master's degree
Mhm.
in education if you're going to teach in an elementary school or a high school. Uh, and You'll show up at your class. You'll be asked what kind of things you want to teach and what developmental age groups you want to work with, and then you'll get book learning in those topics and those developmental age groups. Then you'll get an internship. Then you'll get a job. You'll get your degree and you'll get a job, and that first job is going to be on the job training. That's supervised work. You in your internships are spending time with the developmental age groups you're working with and reporting back to your supervisors. Everybody knows that once you get that job, you're not an experienced teacher. From an old Asian perspective on teaching, the first thing that you do is learn what all human beings need.
Hmm.
And then you learn how to work with any developmental age group, which means that it takes time. It took me 5.5 years of half-time volunteer study in order to be qualified as a teacher. That's mentored work. I never spent a single moment alone with any student without a teacher present until that day, 5.5 years later, that I was certified as a teacher.
Mhm.
Um, on that day that I was certified as a teacher, I didn't need any on-the-job training. I was a very experienced teacher by then. Uh, Teachers like those, uh, people show up to study with them. They check them out to see what needs they have that they aren't getting met, and then they spend time with them, helping them get themselves out of the way of getting their own needs met.
And the subject of teaching is the subject of emotional hygiene that you're referring to here, or what was
Well, I'm
the?
kind of just giving you like the 5 cent version of how I got to emotional hygiene.
Okay. And so at
Yeah.
that point, was there a particular subject that you were teaching?
Yeah, I was teaching this mental, physical, and spiritual self development lifestyle, really,
Hmm.
that again Americans tend to reduce to a martial art.
Right. And is there a word for it, or a category,
It's
a
called
name?
Gondagao, Ghondagw.
Gondagao.
That's a Cantonese word that means soft way.
Hmm.
Um, so once I became a teacher, I had students, and I was uh, working with them, uh, doing this kind of thing. And one of the things you're going to have to do if you're doing mental, physical, and spiritual self-development work is mental health work, especially in
Hmm.
the United States. But I had also been learning how to do mental health work from an old Asian perspective. And I learned that I liked doing that kind of thing and that I was particularly good at it. So I decided at some point to get a graduate degree in psychology and become a therapist.
Hmm.
Prior to doing that, I was a cartographer. I was a map maker.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
You've done a lot of
Uh,
things.
um, and so I did that, and I began working as a therapist. It wasn't too long after I started working as a therapist that I met a guy named Ron Kurtz, who was a fairly well-known person in psychology and who had founded a kind of therapy called Hakomi therapy.
Hmm.
Hakomi therapy is a body-centered approach to therapy, meaning that therapists are paying as much attention to what a person is doing as to what they're saying. Uh, Nonverbal languaging,
Hmm.
use of language, word pattern, to some degree, facial expressions for emotion, that kind of thing. Um, so I spent time studying with him, and I learned how to read people really, really well. The education in Hakomi was excellent for reading people. After I finished studying with Ron, I also studied the work of a guy named Paul Ekman, who did 40 years of impeccable research on facial expressions for emotion and was able to show, along with some of his compadres at the time, that facial expressions for emotion are universal.
Hmm.
That if you learn all of the muscles in the human face and then all the combinations of expression they can make, and then figure out which ones are related to emotions, which is most of them, and then go around the world like Paul did, you'll find that no matter where you are in the world, when you see that particular expression, you can safely assume that that emotion is happening in that person.
Mm.
He also showed or laid the foundations for showing that we human beings experience more of our emotions out of our awareness than in our awareness,
Mm.
and they still work.
And they still work,
Yeah, I'll
meaning,
get to the idea of what I mean
okay.
by that in just a second. Um, so once I had the facial expressions for emotion expertise down and the reading the nonverbal behavior expertise down, I began teaching classes called How to Read People Like an Expert. Initially, that was for law enforcement because that's where the money was, and then I began to do that for other therapists and for a wide variety of people. Um, Along about that time, I started a private practice in counseling, and my private practice was acting a little differently than some of the other people that I graduated with in psychology, and that it settled in really quickly. People would hear about me, they would talk to me, they decide they wanted to work with me, they would set up sessions, they would be there, they would start changing right away.
Mm.
Uh, Even I wasn't sure why all that was happening. But some of
Mhm.
the other people that I graduated with were curious too, and some of them joined my practice, and we kind of studied what was going on to see if we could figure it out. Granted, my approach to psychology came from an eclectic origin with 13 years in a mental, physical, and spiritual self development discipline from China. Um, but what came out of that study was an idea called emotional hygiene. Uh, Emotional hygiene meaning another kind of hygiene. We brush our teeth to keep to make sure that our teeth stay healthy, and we can't we although we can't see what we're protecting our teeth against, we still do it,
Mm.
and there's a consequence if we don't. We keep our bodies clean, make sure that we smell good and look good, uh, and if we don't do that, there's a consequence, and some of the things that we're protecting ourselves from by doing that we also can't see. With emotions, if we consider the idea that uh, our emotions and our use of them has an effect on uh, our own safety and our own social life, uh, then it makes sense that we would need to understand them well enough to make sure that they work for us and they don't affect other people in ways that we don't want them to.
Mm.
Again, definitely a kind of hygiene.
Mhm.
Um, so I at some point realized that I really wasn't a therapist anymore. I was more like an emotional hygienist and a teacher. And and I'm writing a book called Emotional Hygiene, which I expect to have finished in 2021. Uh, what else about who I am? No, I think that's a good start. Do you have any questions about any of that stuff?
Yeah, I do. So, first question is, you mentioned your first training and apprenticeship uh, through the Asian form of study was the first thing to learn was what every human being needs, right? I'm kind of
Yeah.
paraphrasing. And
Uh-huh.
so, and I believe, and I have a guess at what this is because I've done a little bit of work with you, but I'd like you to expound upon that. Can you give us the Cliff Notes version of that? Is it even possible? What is it that every human being needs?
Sure. Uh, Mind you, this ends up being at least in current form, a bit of a world according to Tim perspective.
Mm-hmm. Fair
Uh,
enough.
um, but I think it's defensible. The idea that human beings have a variety of needs that show up developmentally. There's 12 needs, and if any of you out there can think of more, I'm listening. But for the moment, I got 12 needs that we're born with, and then there are needs that come on later in life, like sexual needs when after puberty, and intellectual connection needs, and even spiritual connection needs as we get a little older. Uh, but those 12 needs, uh, 8 physical needs and 4 relational needs, and our lives depend on getting these needs met. None of them are optional. We don't do well, and we stop thriving, and eventually we won't survive if any one of these needs goes too long without getting met. For the first and foremost, a need that we have a very short window on getting met is air. We got to get enough air, and we only got a few minutes without it. Temperature control is another need that we have. Water is another need that we have. Food is another need that we have. Sleep is a need that we have. You can't go all that long without sleep without having that affect your health, and eventually you won't survive that. Uh, um, Cleanliness, there's definite life and death issues around cleanliness, uh, and movement. Those 8 needs right there. Um, and then 4 relational needs: connection, touch, nurture, and love. Connection is a need that's a little bit like air. We may not realize it, but human beings just can't go without connection. We can't do that very well for very long at all. In fact, I think that if a person when it went without any kind of connection whatsoever of any kind with any other, they wouldn't survive very long. A matter of weeks, probably.
Mm.
Luckily, we all have the ability to connect with ourselves, which is something that we have to learn, have to develop, and we used to be able to do much better than we're able to do now in today's world. Before the great agricultural experiment started, and before we stopped living in small band hunter and gather tribal units and so forth.
Mm.
Um, touch kind of goes with that saying as to why that's a need and why it's something that we don't survive without. Sooner or later, that will cause imbalances in us that threaten our lives. Uh, nurture, nurture the feeling of being taken care of.
Mm.
When we have the feeling that we're being taken care of, we're able to put down the walls, we're able to set down the defenses, we're able to do the resting and renewing and repairing and regrowing and new growth that we have to do in order to survive, and without which we don't survive. Love, in the world according to Tim, that I would define that as unconditional positive regard. Unconditional positive regard is also an invitation to thrive, an invitation to matter, an invitation to go ahead and have value and have motivation and act,
Mm.
an invitation to be accepted. Yeah, 12 needs, 12 basic needs.
And so, and my experience with your work, this is something you usually teach a person to become aware of and check
Hmm.
in with yourself about, are you meeting these 12 needs on a daily basis, um, maybe even an hour by hour basis? And then is the idea that, because you said something about how most of our emotions are unconscious, and so is the idea that we bring all of this into a level of consciousness, that we bring our emotions into
Hmm.
a level of consciousness more often than not.
Well, unconscious and conscious are interesting concepts. From an emotional hygiene perspective, all human beings are part conscious and part unconscious, and they're both valuable, and they both partner with each other to co-create a human being. If I practice doing something, if I practice the finger placings and the bow movements and so forth with my violin, at some point my unconscious mind is going to be watching what I'm doing enough that it learns how to do it from me
Mm.
and starts taking care of a lot of that for me, and I get to then take my plus or minus 7 bits of consciousness, not that many bits actually, and apply them to a melody or a song structure or delivering the emotion. My unconscious mind knows how to play the violin. I get to add all of that and essentially achieve mastery.
Mhm.
So it's the same with emotions, and learning how to operate human anger or human joy is probably as complicated, probably more complicated than learning how to master a violin.
That was going to be my next question. So there are, I believe you've referred to it as kind of like four, is it four main emotions?
For primary
Or
emotions,
primary?
yeah.
Yeah. And then we have subsets of emotions that kind of spring out from
Yeah,
inside
well,
of
if
the
you think of
primary.
fear, anger, sorrow, and joy as
Mhm.
primary emotions, you can kind of imagine how they might mix. Take
Mhm.
some sadness and take some anger, and you get resentment.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, I think of those four primary emotions as like the colors on a color wheel,
Mhm. Hmm. I
but,
like that image.
and that there's a bunch of other emotions that you get that we have names for when you mix those together.
Mhm.
In fact, I have an emotion wheel that I use to teach with that includes things like those four emotions, also judgment and um, yeah, I think that's mainly it. For example, if you take anger and add judgment to it, you get emotions that have names like contempt.
Mm.
If you take shame and add anger to it, you get emotions like hatred.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, that would be interesting. I'd love to share that with the audience, that color wheel, if it's something that
it's right here. I can do that if you want.
oh yeah, you could share your screen. That'd be great.
Oh, I can just drop it into the chat, I think,
Oh,
and then
perfect. Yep.
I think so. Let me try that. I've never done that in Zoom, but we'll see if I can do that right now.
I think you can.
Okay, cool.
I believe it.
Let's see. Where's the chat? There it is. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing that the wheel with me, Tim. I'll be sure to include those in our show notes so people can have that as a resource and look at how they're mixing their emotions and what they're creating out of it. I do want to touch on one that I feel like one particular primary emotion that I feel like is rather misunderstood or maybe misused, and that is anger.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about anger and you do something I think that you refer to as warrior work. And
I
is
do.
it around anger? Is it around
Yeah,
being able to
it's
access your
yes.
anger?
Anger and regulation, and how anger is a sliding scale kind of a tool. It has a low end and a high end, and it has all these power settings that between those low ends, and there's different competencies with each power setting. So anger is a tool that takes time to learn. Again, that
Mhm.
definitely probably takes more time and energy and more complicated than learning a violin will ever be to learn. Uh, but if you think about anger, it's got a bad reputation in the world in a funny kind of way. And from one perspective, you could say that's deserved because anger certainly does hurt and damage and scare and has been responsible for a whole lot of pain and suffering. That's true. Uh, but if you stop and think about this, or try to reframe that, if you if anger is a response to threat, and let's say that that's true, anger is a response to threat. Don't threats have power, or they wouldn't be threatening, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Wouldn't we need a power tool that has power, enough power as well to respond to the power that's in the thing that's threatening us?
Mhm.
Yeah, that makes sense too. So anger fits that bill. It's a power tool of the emotion primary emotion tools. It's the power tool. That means that it has risk because anything that has power has risk. But we human beings use so many different power tools for great benefit because they have risk. In fact, the thing that's risky about them is the predominant thing that's valuable about them,
Mhm.
and it's the thing that we have to master in order to be able to get benefit from the use of them. So yeah, whenever you use your anger, there's risk. And when you master that, then anger becomes useful. Think of a sharp knife in a kitchen. That's a good example of a power tool. You know, you and I could go in the kitchen and cut up the ingredients for the stir fry and probably not even be thinking about what we're doing and still get away with it without hurting ourselves. But we wouldn't send a 3-year-old in there to do that because that 3-year-old hasn't done the thing that we've done in order to master the use of a sharp knife, which is a grow enough developmental hand-eye coordination and motor control, and b pick up a knife and practice with it, hopefully with some help from somebody else so we don't cut ourselves the first time. But sooner or later, then that someone else isn't going to be there and we are going to cut ourselves. And when we do, uh, we learn something. Maybe we try again and we don't cut ourselves, and we try again and we do cut ourselves. And about that time, we say, okay, I'm not doing this anymore if I'm going to cut myself.
Mm.
So what I'm going to do instead is get my focus on that sharp edge and always have my focus on that edge whenever that knife is in my hand so that I know where it's pointed. And at that point, I start to be able to use it for its purpose, which is cut things that I want cut and not cut things that I don't want cut.
Mm.
And with a little practice, I've mastered it. I've mastered the use of a risk. Anger's like that, very much like that. Power tool that we need to pick up, practice with, hurt ourselves with on occasion until we get tired of the consequences of the use that problem use of it, and then master it so that it becomes a tool that works just as well as that sharp knife for us.
Mhm. Mhm. And so when you talk about emotional hygiene work, I imagine that all of this plays into it
Yeah,
in many different ways.
I can kind of lay out the foundations of emotional hygiene work real briefly if you like.
Yeah, I would love that. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. I sometimes think of it the bird's eye view of the foundations of emotional hygiene as a like a three-legged table, three different foundations. The first foundation is emotions themselves. What are they? They're tools. They're safety tools. We use them to keep ourselves safe. All of them: fear, anger, sorrow, joy, and all the combinations they make. Uh, how do they work? Through expression. When we express them, they work. Uh, so then, with those two things in mind, we can go ahead and master them. That's one leg of the table. Another leg of the table is our minds. Our emotions happen in our minds and in our bodies, but they do happen in our minds, and there's a strong interrelation between the other things that our minds do and the successful use of emotions. Things like thinking, uh, or remembering, or feeling. That means that I have a thought that feelings and emotions are different things, which we can talk about if it comes up. Uh, Things like wisdom accrual that happens in your mind, and all of the great and awesome automaticity that I alluded to before when it comes to this conscious unconscious partnership that our minds do. All of that in partnership with emotions allows emotions to be the useful tools that they are. So the second leg of this table is the functions that are in our mind other than emotions. The third leg of this table is the awareness that emotions happen if as much in our minds as in our bodies.
Mm.
That means taking care of our bodies, understanding our bodies, learning how to tell what's happening in our bodies in a way that's real time and in the moment throughout our lives. especially taking care of things like our brain chemistry, so that we have a neurotransmitter, a balance and availability that allows emotions and all those other mind functions to work. Taking care of our brain chemistry is essentially a diet and nutrition exercise.
Mm.
It's a diet and nutrition exercise because we're learning that a pretty good majority of the neurotransmitter chemicals that we use in our brain, or the immediate building blocks for them, are being manufactured in our gut by our friendly bacteria.
Mm.
That means that we need to make sure that our friendly bacteria stay alive and and well. And whenever things happen in our gut that cause mass die-offs, that we figure out a way to re-inoculate ourselves as best we're able to.
Mhm.
But also trying to avoid those mass die-offs, uh, essentially through effective diet and nutrition. That also means relearning about diet and nutrition, relearning what our ancestors prior to agriculture 10 to 12,000 years ago knew really well about how to keep that probiotic community alive and well, so that our minds were able to function well.
Do you think that's something that they just intuitively knew?
No, I don't. I think that human beings prior to agriculture had much simpler lives,
Hmm.
and they were able to focus on the immediacies of life much more clearly, because there was a lot less distraction. And so they knew generation after generation for hundreds of thousands of years uh, how to eat well, how to mix food well. uh, um,
And what did that diet look like? Are we
well,
talking
it
about?
looked like a diet that that's a big question. I mean, when you start talking to, there's all kinds of thoughts out there, and there's all kinds of support and all kinds of criticism for these thoughts.
Yep.
But when you start looking at ideas like, why do human beings have different blood types, and why
Mm.
do the differing blood types tend to relate to differing what genetic groupings that we might call ethnicities or races and things like that. And where did those evolve, and why did it make sense that peoples that live closer to the equator were darker skinned, and peoples that live closer to the higher latitudes were lighter skinned, and
Mm.
what did that mean about their diets?
Mm.
And
So you're
then
saying it's based on geography
I'm
in.
not I'm saying that's a factor.
Hmm.
That's a
Yeah.
factor. If you know what your blood type is, it's a guide. That's about what it is, a guide to how you might consider eating.
Hmm.
And that therefore those diets, going back prior to agriculture, they varied.
Right.
But for the particular place that a person was living in, and the particular genetic heritage that they had, those diets were optimal, but they varied.
And there, I mean, one thing's for sure that I think we could agree on is foods weren't processed. They were raw or maybe cooked over fire, but
Yeah, they were initially they were raw.
mhm,
The closer you are to the equator, this is all like real. These are guides, not hard truths whatsoever.
mhm,
Uh, the more likely it is that you could be a person who could be a vegetarian, who could live on a plant-based diet.
mhm,
The farther north you went, the more like it was that you would be relying on a higher protein based diet.
mhm,
If you're going to be a higher protein based diet kind of person or a group of people, then you're going to have a faster metabolism,
mhm,
so that you're not spending all of your time lethargically sitting there digesting the meat that you just ate.
mhm,
You're going to be able to live your normal life. The further south you go, you're going to be a slower metabolism kind of diet, because breaking down plants is it needs time.
mhm,
But you don't have to worry about the fact that it's cold, or that there's a contingencies of life that require you an ability to not be lethargic while you digest your meat.
mhm,
So faster metabolism, higher, farther north, lighter skin, meat eaters, protein eaters, uh, darker skin, more vegetarian, plant-based diets, slower metabolism, closer to the equator.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then the other issue about diet really is that that relates to emotional hygiene is the way that we combine foods in our stomach compared to the way we used to do that. Today, in today's world, if you eat a meat and potato diet, you're putting a food that needs strong acidity in your stomach. At the same time, you're putting a food that needs strong alkalinity in your stomach. And
Mm-hmm.
basic chemistry says that if your stomach just dumps those chemicals, then they're going to neutralize each other, and you lose your digestive fire.
Mm. Well, and also you're not able to absorb the nutrients that you're getting from that you should be getting from those foods. You're not able to absorb them as
Yes,
much, right? You
yes,
lose the
absolutely,
percentage.
absolutely. But from an emotional hygiene perspective, this means that you're going to get parts of your the contents of your stomach are going to be digested, parts are going to be not digested, but you're going to have neutralized acidity and alkalinity, and there's going to be concentrations of acidity and concentrations of alkalinity. It all goes down into your stomach, and those concentrations of acidity and alkalinity start killing off bacteria.
Mm-hmm.
So poor food mixing is which is really 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 forgotten about and widely misunderstood, causes the destruction of a lot of bacteria, especially the bacteria that we need to have a healthy gut wall. We have a symbiotic relationship with a bunch of bacteria that line our gut wall that allow us to have a healthy gut wall. And if they're not there, and they won't be with that poor food mixing
Mm-hmm.
as much, you end up with a low grade to mid grade or even a debilitatingly high grade leaky gut condition.
Mm-hmm.
I think a low grade leaky gut condition is the norm today.
Mm-hmm. And what are do you know what the symptoms of, of low grade leaky gut?
Starting at low grade, certainly medium grade, is an overactivated immune system.
Mm.
That's the main symptom.
Mm-hmm.
The viruses and the bacteria and the fungi and the incapably digested particles are getting into your blood when they wouldn't otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
And your immune system is going, oh, fungus, bacteria, virus, attack that. I don't know what that thing is right there. It's part this and it's part that. Maybe we should attack that too.
Mm-hmm.
And so your immune system goes into high gear and stays that way pretty much 24/7 as long as you eat that way.
Mm-hmm.
And you end up with the chronic with the very common issue of inflammation.
Mm. Yeah.
And
Okay.
inflammation is the thing that you learn in med school is the thing you're there to treat.
Right.
It's a predominant cause of things that people come to doctors for today
Mm-hmm.
because presumably there's a low grade leaky gut issue in a widespread way. And also the other bacteria that get killed off are the ones that are busy making the serotonin or the building blocks for dopamine or things like that need to get up into your brain so your mind works.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
so, emotional hygiene then. Emotions, what are they? How do we use them? How do we master them? Our mind in the way that it supports emotions, thoughts, feelings, uh, memories, other cognitive processes, and the automaticity that our unconsciousness delivers to us because we need it,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and our body's role in emotional hygiene, in particular our diet, nutrition, keeping our gut bacteria alive and well, and making sure we have all of the neurotransmitter brain chemicals that we need.
So can I ask one clarifying question?
Please ask a dozen.
Okay. Well, the one I'm dying to ask is how emotions and feelings are different.
Okay, a guy named Antonio Damasio, pretty well-known guy in neuroscience, neurology, has written a number of books, popular books, for people to get a window into neuroscience research, and he's done a lot of research himself. He showed he postulated an idea that human beings engage in this process of taking any current moment that we're in and evaluating it on a scale between with sorrow at one end and joy on the other end. and with the idea that sorrow, which means hurting, because sorrow is the tool that we use to help us get past the pain that comes when we lose things. Uh, it kind of implies less optimal. Maybe we'll just go ahead and do it. We'll use the word bad,
Mm.
and joy. We'll go ahead and do it. I mean, I don't know if how supportable this actually is, but we'll go ahead and use the word good.
Mm-hmm.
So we got bad and good, sorrow and joy. And if human beings are actually doing that in any given moment, and you ask me how am I doing, and that part of me that does that comes up with a somewhere near the middle of that scale about my current moment, I'll say I'm doing fine. Yeah, I'm
Mm.
fine. And if it's Tim who's hearing that, Tim's going to be really, really appreciating that message and finding it of high value. It's going to help me. Oh, you're fine. Okay, I know where you are on the scale. Well, that helps me know where I am on the scale since I'm with you. um, that process, that qualitative assessment of a current moment on that scale is a feeling based experience. So I'm gonna go ahead and define feelings as that kind of qualitative assessment of a current situation. Emotions, we have names for those: fear, anger, sorrow, joy. They're tools. They're individually tailored tools that we have, and they each have a different purpose because they respond to different circumstances. But all of them have the same intention, which is to increase our safety. Even joy. Joy is not optional in life. We don't have enough joy, we don't do well, and sooner or later we won't make it. They're all life critical safety tools.
Mm. I'm just digesting that. It's hard to wrap my head around that. Do you find that people often struggle with understanding the difference between emotion and feeling?
Well, I'll refer him to Damasio's book, Joy, Sorrow. Let's see, looking for Spinoza, Joy, Sorrow, and the Feeling Brain, and they can read about his research and read about his arguments for this idea that this is what human beings do, and
Mm-hmm.
it's well written, sound, brilliant,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and and they can kind of get why I'm coming from it from that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
It's also not hard for me to understand why feelings and emotions would be two words that would kind of start to have an interchangeable meaning.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you get people who work with others who often want to ask the question when someone brings up an emotion, where are you feeling that in your body?
Mm-hmm.
As a way to help them kind of understand more about what's happening. I think that is a way to help someone understand more about what's happening, but there's much more direct, much more tangibly available ways for a person to know what they're feeling and know uh, why they're feeling that, and know how to use both that feeling and any emotions that show up with it
So,
effectively.
for example, if you ask me how I'm feeling, and I immediately, let's say I'm aware of my body and I'm aware of this ability to tap into where I'm feeling something in my body. Like, for example, I say, oh, I have tightness in my chest.
Hmm.
This is not an emotion. This is a feeling.
Right.
And that's what you're saying is
That's a
different.
feeling. Yeah.
Okay.
It might imply something about an emotion.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, tightness depend. I would say, well, where in your chest is it down? It's up. It's right up here someplace.
Mm-hmm.
Put your hand here. You want to try it?
Sure.
Do you have tightness in your chest?
No, actually, my stomach's growling. That's
Your
what I'm
stomach.
feeling right
Okay.
now.
If you did, when you do this with people, you might notice that when they do that, they something happens to the breath at the moment that they do it.
Mm,
The breath might catch, or it might start moving out of a pattern of that it's already in. Like for example, your breath just started moving.
yeah.
Uh, and it's not always true, it's one possibility is that there's a tightness here to restrict what's happening here. What happens here? Speech happens. Oral communication happens
Mm-hmm.
here. Often a tightening here is an attempt to restrict communication here. This particular tightening most often is an attempt to restrict sadness.
In the chest.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sometimes, not very often, it ends up being an attempt to restrict anger, but more often than not, it's an attempt to restrict sadness.
So putting my hand on my chest has me thinking about one of the basic human needs, which is touch.
Hmm.
And I guess what I'm wondering in terms of like our current day landscape with COVID and not getting to hug people, not really getting to be in the same room with people, when we talk about having a connection with ourselves and being able to connect with ourselves, is this kind of touch enough? Like just putting my hand on my chest. And when you talk about that basic human need,
Well, let me ask you this. How was it to put your hand on your chest?
it's really nice. I
Yeah,
don't want to stop.
it is nice, right?
Yeah,
And lo and behold, that's something that's 100% freely available to you 24/7.
right. Yeah.
You can put your hand on your chest and receive that nice feeling.
Hmm.
If someone else puts their hand on your chest, preferably they're close enough to you to do that. If someone else puts their hand on your chest, it's also going to feel good. But you can do that. You can meet that need to some degree.
Hmm.
Here, let me give you a little example. If
Okay.
you were to take your, are you right-handed?
Yes.
Take your right hand and just reach over and gently just rest it on the outer side of your arm, between your shoulder and your elbow,
Hmm.
lightly. Connected touch, but lightly connected touch. And
Hmm.
just hang out with that for a minute and see what you notice. So that gets your breath moving, right?
Hmm.
It feels good, doesn't it?
Hmm.
There's a kind of warmth that shows up, right?
Yeah.
This is this is this is a um um it meets the need.
It's weird. It doesn't even really feel like my touch. Does that make
Yes,
sense?
yes, yes. It doesn't. It feels like someone else has got their hand up,
Yes,
right?
it
Except that
does.
you have the experience of both sides of that connection.
Mm,
You have the experience of your nervous system inside your hand and also in your arm, so you know that you can feel both sides of the connection.
mm. This to me feels
However,
like nurture.
it's that's right. You can provide a lot of nurture to yourself. We're born into the world. We have parents who ideally who provide good attachment parenting. They take care of us. They meet our needs and they meet our needs and they meet our needs. And we every time they meet our needs fully enough, we feel safe. And pretty soon we're feeling safe often enough, and our needs are met often enough that we start believing that they will be going forward, and we achieve secure attachment. That secure place where we believe our needs are and will be met, and that we are and will be safe
Mm,
going forward. Our parents are doing all that well enough that we learn how to do it. They teach us how to do it. We learn by imitation, and we start meeting our own needs. And at some point, it becomes pretty apparent that there's somebody there. There's a reciprocal part of us. There's us and ourselves, and we meet each other's needs. We can touch ourselves and meet the need enough to survive and thrive. We can uh, um, um, love ourselves, feel love for ourselves, and meet that need. We can't take care of ourselves and give ourselves the experience of the feeling of being taken care of. We can connect with ourselves. You there? Yeah, I'm here. Oh, cool. Even before this interview today, I checked in with myself. You here? Yeah. So we're doing this together. Yep, we're doing this together.
So I have a question about that. And I think I'm not alone in that inner voice or that other part of yourself is often hard to connect with or hard to hear. And it does take practice, just like all of this takes practice.
Yeah.
So I think the question is for me, I get into this battle about, well, who is the one that's answering? Is this the ego, the mind that's answering? Or is this actually, I think of the soul as the seat of the soul is the heart. And I try to discern between who is the one that is answering my question of, hey, are you there? Are you fine? And so I guess the question is, how do you know
It's an
that's the
interesting,
voice?
yeah, unconsciousness. If we know that consciousness is the process of drawing information in from our senses, processing it into an approximation of what's currently real, placing ourselves in that reality, becoming aware that we then have volition. I think that we can do something in that reality, coming up with a plan and doing it, boiled down to perceiving, planning, and acting. And we know that unconsciousness is everything else that we are, which is all of our thoughts, which happen without us needing to make them happen. We can take charge of them, but feelings, emotions, all that stuff happens out of our awareness, uh, or out of our volition. Uh, Wisdom accrual, something that happens out of our volition, and all the automaticity that I was talking about. Then that means that um, when you sit down with yourself and say, "Hey, are you there?" You're going to have to learn to sort through a message that comes back that really ends up being you, and the messages that come that end up being a lot of that automaticity. Like, for example, if I learn that when I'm young that dogs are dangerous because I get attacked by them,
Mm-hmm.
and when I'm older, I might see a dog coming, and I might ask myself, "Do you think it's safe?" And myself will say whatever it's going to say. Depends on blah blah blah, maybe. But I might have another part of me that developed when I was very young, who's there to keep me safe, that says run.
Mm-hmm.
So then you're gonna have to spend a little time with yourself and sort out what of the activation in your mind is these protecting parts of you, or these attempts to protect you, and what is actually the you that's there with you.
Mm-hmm. It's a
That's
deep
all part of
practice.
yeah, that's all part of it. That's all part of the emotional hygiene idea.
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
lot there, but it's not so much. We're not rocket science, really. Human beings can be boiled down pretty quickly, and we can especially when we understand that emotions are safety tools,
Mm-hmm.
and learn how to tell when they're around, and learn what their purpose is, and get practice with that purpose, and practice with the use of them. Ideally, practice enough that becomes automatic, then it starts to get a lot simpler
Mm-hmm.
to live a full life, to thrive,
Mm-hmm.
have that birthright life that all human beings are born to have, every one of us, which is happy, rich, challenging in the right amount, and satisfying.
Tim, we are coming up to the end of our hour, and I don't even think I asked you any one of these questions on my list.
It's okay. I'm. It
Uh,
went where it needed to.
yes, well, and it always does.
Uh-huh.
I guess what I'd like to close with, and everything that you just said is perfect way to close. But I'm just wondering if there's anything else you want to share with the audience, and if there are any words of wisdom that you live by that keep you connected, and that you just remind yourself of, and that you come back to day in and day out.
Yeah. In terms of things I want to say, uh, the the current container for this emotional hygiene project that I'm in, and other people are joining me in, is the Westfeldt Institute for Emotional Hygiene. That's online at westfeldtinstitute.com, and that group is beginning to do training work on emotions. We have an emotions 101 class that talks about some of the things I talked about with you today, and we have a 10 core tenets class that talks about core ideas about how to use emotions, how to understand them, how to be emotionally hygienic. We have a practitioner in training, a coach practitioner in training class that's long, and well, I wouldn't say long. It's actually fairly short, but it prepares a person to do this kind of work
Mm.
with people,
Mhm.
and leads to a certification and an ability to, if someone wanted to do this kind of work for a living successfully.
Mm.
Um, so that's one thing I wanted to say. As for words of wisdom, the thing that always comes to mind if somebody asks me for words of wisdom is the universe is unfolding as it should.
Mm.
Because I like, oh yeah, okay,
Mm.
I can get my breath going on that one.
Yeah.
Just we all need to do that. And an old Asian, I think it's Chinese saying that says that everyone is always doing the best they can,
Mm.
all of the time,
Mm.
and no one can ask more of anyone.
Mm.
Everyone meaning no exceptions, everyone, all of the time meaning no exceptions. You're always doing the best you can, even if it sucks, which it does sometimes. So that becomes the great equalizer. That means that everybody who's ever lived and everyone's alive today, we're all doing the best we can. Sometimes excellent, sometimes not.
Mhm. Thank you. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate your wisdom that you're sharing it with us. And we will be sure to provide links to your website and highlight those courses that you have going on
Yeah,
right now.
we have one
Um,
coming up on the 20th of January. That's the Emotions 101 class. So,
okay,
yeah, the people interested
great. And is that
uh,
the best way to find you?
at
And
the Institute, westfeldinstitute.com. Yeah, that is.
okay,
Yeah.
great. Well, thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so
Oh,
much.
I'm looking forward to your book coming out in 2021.
Yeah, it's definitely coming. It's been a long time coming, but it's definitely coming. The draft is nearly finished.
Oh, I can't wait to read it.
Yeah, thank you. I can't wait to read it either.
Well, stay well, stay safe,
Thank you.
and
You too.
we'll be in touch.
Great to see you. Great to see
You
you.
too, Tim. Thank you so much.
Yeah, blessings.
Likewise.
Bye
Okay.
bye.